It's so lovely to see you all here. I'm so thrilled. It's great. All right, you have questions, so let's get serious.
I want to start by saying congratulations.
Thank you.
On what you have described as by far the most difficult to produce of the 9 books that you've written throughout your career. Why was it so difficult?
Well, the delight of writing a novel is that a character will arrive for me in my imagination, maybe a cast of characters, and almost certainly a scene of some sort. And then I follow that along and I find the story. But this time I had to go back and find myself, and I had to find my little self and my teenage self and my 20-something self and then my 30-something self, and it was really hard to do. It was, I mean, I have kept a lot of journals in my lifetime, so I have journals all the way back to my teenage years. There's a big chunk of them. But it was so hard, not simply to locate myself again, but then to realise the fragility of myself at certain times in my life, and the sense of vulnerability and wonder. Finding the wonder in my little self was really extraordinary. Finding the sort of the vulnerability and the brokenness of my teenage years, finding, you know, this vulnerable and somewhat reckless 20-something-year-old, and then, you know, and then the challenges that came beyond that. It was really hard to see, really hard to revisit, and often re-traumatising. And I didn't expect that. I didn't realise. I mean, a novel is just a breeze compared to doing a memoir, in my experience. And a novel is difficult because of plot and structure and voice and narrative flow, and Danielle knows all the pedantry of language. But the memoir was difficult because I had to somehow find a wholeness to the person that was at the heart of the book. And in order to do that, I somehow had to integrate all these things into myself. And I'd never done that before. I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen myself in the way that it caused me to see myself.
So why was it so important for you to write a memoir? Why stick with it when it was so difficult?
Yeah, well, exactly. I started it because I turned 50 and I was really unwell, and I thought I probably ought to write these stories down for my children, because they had often said, you ought to write these down, and lots of people had said, you ought to write these stories down. And so I started, and then I dallied. It was really hard, and there were a lot of stories. And how do you colour life? I'm nearly 60. How do you colour life back to a certain amount of words? What's important? What's not important? And ultimately, I had to write everything in order to be able to get some sense of what is it ultimately going to be. And poor Gabby and Jane and the beloved Ali Laveau, who's my brilliant editor and has worked with me on 5 or 6 of my novels, they all received this like 135,000 word sort of, brick. And I was like, but I don't know what to do with it now. And
their problem.
yeah. And they came back to me and said, look, you've got one memoir is family and recipes and children and all of that sort of stuff. One memoir is travel stories and writing and anecdotes. And one story is the spiritual story. And that's the one you need to do. And as a number of my dear friends know, that's the one I did not want to confess to. I think I actually wrote everything else around it to hide it. And when I realised, but when Jane Porphyriman tells you, and when Gabby Nair tells you, and when Ali Laveau tells you, look, that's the one, I had to get braver than I've probably ever had to get in my life, because I know this seems ridiculous to all of you who know me so well, but I actually didn't want to be seen as a spiritual person, because I thought it meant you had to have answers, and I don't have any answers.
You have said that you felt you owed the readers of your previous books a sense of the person who had been at the heart of all those books. And yet what the memoir also does is reveal to the reader how much of yourself and your life experiences have actually formed the basis of your novels and their characters. So has producing this memoir and having had to revisit and work through so many of your formative experiences given you a greater insight into where your fictional characters and storylines have come from?
That's such an interesting question. I've actually not really considered that, but I think it's made my creative landscape clearer. I actually feel that I've given myself a certain freedom. I thank you. I've just noticed that. That's good. I do. I feel more free. Yeah, it's as if that probably was quite a busy thing in the back of my mind. Not intentionally, but it's just there. And something about writing this is, I actually feel liberated to write whatever on earth I want to write now. It's not that I didn't do that before, but there were things trying to come out, I suspect,
yes.
that came out in the books, as you
yes.
say. And I didn't mean for them to come out in the books, just let me... And Melinda, where is Melinda? Oh, there you are. The light's right behind you. Melinda pointed this out to me, I think with Whiteheart. She pointed out that I'd put in the neighbours to our nans and stuff like that, and I didn't even remember. But yes, these things do accidentally pop up in
Yes, I'm not sure
fiction.
how accidental it is. I recall when I first read Museum of Modern Love being almost shocked by the parallels that I saw in your character Lydia, her feelings and sensibility, and in where you were in your life at the time. I thought it was a very brave thing.
Yes, but the amazing thing about that, as you know, was that it took 11 years to write that book. And so I wrote it, and then after it came out, it became much more like Lydia's life.
Yes. A lot of circles here.
That was very strange. That was very
You do
strange.
actually admit to this in the memoir, I think, to a degree. You say that in the process of revisiting a book and its characters, you realise that you had probably been hiding in plain sight after all, which I think
I did have that. I picked one of them up recently to, reference something and was quite startled by that. I thought, ooh.
Heather, you've always been a strong advocate for the development of any would-be writer's imaginative powers. But do you think artists are as much a product of their experience as their imagination? Or artists generally?
I suspect all people who follow a creative life have a very rich imagination. Despite whatever form of art you choose to pursue. And I know there's lots of artists and writers here tonight. I wonder whether imagination comes, or whether it's because of the emotional landscape that you come into, or the physical land. I wonder to what extent all those things play a part. But they're obviously there's a varied process, because people spring up everywhere from all sorts of backgrounds, don't they? But I think in Tasmania, it's so evident to me, and I'm sure for many of us who are artists here in Tasmania, how rich it is as a place of physical landscape, light and seasons and beauty, as well as an enormous community of really interesting and fascinating people. So that is rich. And of course, the visual arts, it's spectacular for that. I don't know if that really... That's a very curious thing. I don't know.
Well, yes, it's interesting, isn't it, the thread between the two and whether one takes off from the other. Or
what do you think?
Well, I think I'm more experienced, sit more on the experience side, but probably the imaginative side comes out of that, doesn't it? The need to do something, in a sense, do something, create something out of your experiences.
I was really lucky to have the parents that I have. Like, Mum was reading rhyming poetry to me and wonderful little golden books. And, because my sister was born almost exactly 3 years after me, just at this pivotal age in my development, Mum's got me sitting beside her on the couch, reading to me while she's breastfeeding my sister. And it was how I learned to read, because Mum read and read and read, and eventually I just realised, that's how the words suddenly started to make sense. And I've talked about this in the memoir. And so to have a mum with so much fun. There was always rhyming poetry, always limericks, always jokes, always a theatrical quality to life. And then I had my dad, who had this serious love of literature and introduced me so early to, Faulkner and then to the Russians. And so I was fostered, thanks to the State Library, let me say, because we didn't own hardly any books. But Dad and Mum both took me to the library, and I would just plough through books every week. And, it's one of the great benefits of libraries. They really are such an important part of our society, because for those of us who can't afford books, there is a wellspring for imagination for any future writer or creator.
And perhaps that's what taught you how to use your experiences for imaginative purposes.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes, and to go into the library and realise all these other people had done this thing, and that stories were so fascinating to me from such an early age. They made a big impression. I know I talk about this, and some of you will have heard this story before, but when I was 6, my dad took me to the library, and for the first time I went into the adult section. And for years and years after I left Tasmania, I used to think that there was actually a step up into the adult section of the library, because that's how it felt, that we went over into the adult section and he pulled this little slender volume off the shelf, and it was The Old Man and the Sea. And I had to renew it. He went back and renewed it a couple of times. And to those of you who know it, it's such a short book. But it was about fishing, so I love fishing. But I remember getting to the end of that book and being so devastated by the ending, because I'd never read a book with a sad ending before. And thinking, writing doesn't just take you places, it makes you feel things. And then there was definitely a feeling then of like, if I was going to write, that's the sort of writer I would want to be.
A central theme of this book is a significant role in your life, not so much of imagination, but of forces in the universe, as we've spoken about, the sort of spiritual side of things that we don't understand generally, and of things that you've experienced that were very real to you and had very real effects on you, but that can't be explained by our Western notion of reality. When I read The River Wife, your third novel, I actually struggled a bit with why you felt the need to go off into that sort of shape-shifting fantasy world as I saw it. But having read the memoir, I now wonder if The River Wife was absolutely a result of your sense of reality. Is that how you feel about it? Have you been trying all along to explore some of these unknown parts of our consciousness that you yourself have experienced?
I think that's probably true, although accidentally, I have to say, because I know Danielle. Where are you, Danielle? She's here. Oh, there you are, sweet. Hello. There was this moment where Danielle and I, as you know, wrote the trilogy children's books under the name Angelica Banks, and there was a moment where the first book, or the second book, I can't remember, was nominated for Best Children's Fantasy Novel. And Danielle rang me to tell me, and I said, but it's not a fantasy novel. She's like, yes, darling, it is. But that's what writers do. We fly out the window and go to visit other lands, don't we? And yeah, this is the thing, and, my children know this well. I often miss the most obvious things. So yes, probably. Probably.
Yes. I think it is one of the extraordinary, well, it was for me one of the extraordinary things in the memoir to realise how for you there is that marriage between your reality and in a sense this other world.
Yes, it's a porous experience for me. Yes.
You write in your memoir about your acceptance of everything that's happened to you and the choices made along the way, because that's what it took to get you to where you are. But is there anything, other than rejecting a blood transfusion after the birth of your second child, that you mentioned in the memoir, that you regret?
I think I made a decision quite, probably in my early 20s, that I wasn't going to regret anything. It just seemed such a waste of time. And it's much better, I think, to learn from something than to go along regretting it. So, you know, is there anything that I would do differently? Oh, look, you know, my wiser self, now that I'm this old, might have told that girl when she's in her early 20s and decides, because she's having strange dreams and needs to go off to be with the Native Americans, that it was maybe a reckless and, you know, and possibly dangerous thing to do. But otherwise I wouldn't have done it.
But in no way do you regret having done it?
No. And in a way I suspect that's partly why the book has ended up being called Nothing Bad Ever Happens Here, because maybe nothing bad ever happens here, and maybe there really isn't anything to regret. Maybe it's all perfect. Maybe it's all good. It's hard to believe that, because there is a lot that we can look at right now and say that's clearly not good. But maybe somewhere in all of this it's not about good and bad, and it's not about right and wrong. It's just what is.
Yes, and that's coming to an acceptance of that.
Yeah, it's a form of surrender, I think, ultimately, which I suspect is what health has taught me.
Indeed. You were given a piece of advice early in your advertising career that if you didn't get on with your dream of becoming a writer, you'd risk ending up with a headstone that said, "Here lies Heather Rose, who wrote the great Coke commercial." I don't think that's going to be the case, but what would you like to be written on your headstone?
I used to think that I would like it to say, "I made the most of every moment." And that has been a great mantra for me in life, I have to say. But now that I've finished the memoir, if people came to visit my grave, I don't want a grave, by the way, but I just want to be dispersed. I think I'd like it to say, "Choose joy."
Okay, remember that, everybody.
Yeah, choose joy. Because I wouldn't want anyone to grieve for me, and joy is always a choice. And that's one of the things I realised as I was working on the memoir, is that so often the thing that has kept the chronic pain at bay has been joy. And there's, to me, an inverse relationship between those two things. The more pain I allow myself to feel, the sadder I feel. Whereas the more joyful I feel, the less pain I can feel. So it's been a very powerful lesson for me to choose joy on a daily basis.
And that is an active choice. Yeah.
It's an active choice, yeah. So if I could, you know, I might as well write a billboard on my gravestone.
Indeed.
Just choose joy. That's good.
I don't know how we're doing time-wise. 2 minutes? All right, well, let's just look to the future now. You're working on a historical novel at the moment,
yes.
And there are also plans in the pipeline for filming next year of both a series based on Bruni and a film based on Museum of Modern Love. Is that right?
They're both in development, and the beautiful Virginia Whitwell, who is the producer of the film for the Museum of Modern Love, is here tonight. I'm so grateful to you being here, Virginia. It's lovely to have you. And Sue Maslin and Charlotte Seymour, who are the producers of the Bruni TV series, sent their love. They couldn't be here because they've been in the UK. They are in the UK getting funding and sorting out streaming platforms and all that. And Virginia will know much better than I when you're anticipating. I mean, do we know anything yet?
Let's put you on the spot here.
It's a long. These are long things, and they're like camels through the eye of a needle. So we wait, and if it happens, it's great, and if it doesn't, it was a lovely fantasy.
And what about the novel? Anything you'd like to?
Oh, the novel! I'm having such. I've had to put it aside, of course, in the lead up to all this, and we are moving house, so I get back to it in January, and I'm really looking forward to it. I worked really hard on it through last year and for several years I've been working on it. There's a lot of research, so I'm taking sort of the 1700s and looking at how we ended up here if you go back to the birth of the Industrial Revolution, because it seems to me that no one here will be surprised to hear me say this, but we're a bit fucked economically, and we're really fucked environmentally, and it's that the economy and the environment that we've ended up with have caused us to live in a world that's dangerous for our children and our grandchildren. And it's mentally unsafe, it's physically unsafe, we have no certainty for them. How are they meant to go forward with the legacy that we've left them? So I thought I would just tackle that by way of by way of some people who turn up here in Tasmania back in the early 1800s and who are loosely based on family history.
Well, good to know you're going back to the easy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you, Tania. Thank you.